Professor of Management and Senior Associate Dean for Academic Affairs. And Anna Plemons is a Clinical Assistant Professor in the English and Director of the Class Program for the College of Arts and Sciences. And I had been talking with Anna last year. She had done quite a lot of research on making syllabi readable, making syllabi that students will read and understand, and how to, she'd done quite a lot of research comparing different styles. And then I had received a link to an article that Tom was interviewed for the WSU Insider, and his research has been in fair classroom practices that disarm the threat of evaluation retaliation. So one of the things faculty talk about is, well, but if I get really bad evaluations, then what's going to happen? And so Tom's been investigating that area, and he also had some ideas about how you write your syllabus and what needs to be on your syllabus. So I thought it might be nice to bring the two together and talk about how we write good, clear syllabi. And I am going to have to sneak out early, so it's not anything personal. All right, thanks, Tom and Anna, and
Thank you.
Take it away.
So Anna and I decided I would go first, and I'll give you all sorts of reasons to really want to write great syllabi, and then she'll show you how. So, sound about the plan?
That is the promise. We'll see.
Okay. So, we all would like our courses to be fairly rigorous, right? To have students learn a lot, to be able to demand a lot of students, and so forth. But we don't always do that, right? Maybe the people in this room do. But maybe you have some friends or colleagues who, maybe don't do that, right? So, I mean, and kind of what's the often reason that we don't make our courses rigorous as we think maybe they could be or should be?
Evaluations.
So it's evaluations. This is one thing. We'll have a lot to say about that in a minute. Any other reasons?
Learning outcomes.
Say again?
Learning outcomes.
Is you end up with lower outcomes?
Learning outcomes.
Oh, learning outcomes. Okay. So rigor might be having very ambitious learning outcomes, right? But it could be, and I have met some faculty, although I don't think this is as much as an issue anymore as it was, say, 5-10 years ago, about not wanting to have any learning outcomes at all on their syllabus. I think that ship's kind of sailed.
I find it takes a lot more energy as an instructor to maintain high expectations and rigorous.
When you have a large class, a lot of times it's easier to just grade for completion than to be rigorous about, taking every half point off or holding high standards or making sure that, you give the kinds of assignments where students can demonstrate rigor.
Yeah, it's more work for us, isn't it?
Yeah.
And on the grading side, on the syllabus designing side, particularly learning outcomes, it's more work for us. One other reason I've heard is that there's also concern that students want to do the work. So you can sort of lay out sort of this great ambitious agenda for your course, and then the students just say that's too much work, and maybe they even complain about that as well, right? You're much harder than all my other teachers, which often isn't true. Actually, when we have new instructors come to the Vancouver campus, I often have to, one of the things that at least the Vancouver campus students have learned to do, I'm not sure about the other campuses, is if the instructor's brand new, is go tell the instructor, you're much harder than all my other instructors. And often they're not. I look into these things. Anyway, so those are some of the concerns. All right, but obviously the concern I want to talk about in more depth is the concern about evaluation retaliation. So if I'm too hard on my students, either by giving them too much work or grading them too stringently, that they will get even with me on the evaluations by giving me lower evaluations. So that seems to be the common wisdom. Now, the question is how much do they do that? So one way of measuring how much students tend to do that is by looking at a correlation coefficient. So pretty much I think anyone in the social sciences familiar with correlation coefficients. Anybody here not familiar with the correlation coefficient? I can explain it otherwise. So the correlation coefficient, so let me just sort of get your best guess. What do you think the correlation coefficient is from 0.0 to 1.0 is the range here, is between the grade students think they're getting when they complete these evaluations to the score they actually give you on your evaluations? What's your best guess?
.72.
Thank you, and very precise. I like that. 0.72. Who else?
0.3.
Okay, 0.3.
And a bit lower than we think.
Anybody in Spokane, Tri-Cities, or Vancouver want to hazard a guess? Oh, it's fun to play. All right, you are closest. The research shows, and there's a bunch of research on this, that it tends to range between 0.10 and 0.47. So 0.72 is definitely on the high side, but I bet that's probably what most people think. It's definitely higher than, say, 0.5. But the research shows that it's almost never higher than, well, all the research shows that it's never higher than 0.5. 0.47 was the highest that was found in some studies. I have measured it, at least in the College of Business, all campuses here at WSU. That was 10 years ago, and we still had it on paper. And the correlation in the College of Business was 0.22. So if you remember from statistics, then the percent of variance that explains, you just square that number. And in the case of the College of Business, it explained between 4 and 5% of the variance. 95% of the variance in evaluations was due to something that had nothing to do with grades. Okay, even at the high end, 0.47, you square that, you get, what do you get, about 0.2? 20% of the variance? I actually wrote it down here somewhere. It's still, it might be enough to be a little bit worried about if you're trying to get every edge that you can, because we do care about these evaluations. They figure into retention and promotion decisions. But it's actually, I think, surprisingly small. Nonetheless, people are worried about it. Now, because faculty are worried about it, faculty respond in a number of interesting ways to this fear, if that's the right word. And so there's one study by Simpson and Saga who took a look at the most popular methods in their study to deal with the fear of evaluation retaliation. And they found in their sample that at least 24% of the sample did one of the following, or one or more of the following. One, grading leniently, giving more A's than perhaps they would think the students deserve. Lowering the work standards, so giving them less work. Timing the administration of the evaluations. We can't do the same work because it's online. But certainly back when this study was done in 2000, when pretty much everything was paper, people would time the administration of the evaluations just to the best possible day, right? And I've seen people at WSU do this. You know, so it's like, okay, I've got a 2-week window. I'll carry them with me every day to class. And when I can see that the biggest troublemakers in the class aren't there that day, that's the day I give it. Okay, or maybe you time it after you give back an exam where they did surprisingly well. So there's these kind of timing issues.
Usually they bring food.
But that's another one, inducements. So that's one of the things. Listen, you're bringing food, right? And another one was, and actually something that WSU has forbidden for a long time, is actually being present during the evaluations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So these are kinds of the ways that faculty would deal with it to try and somehow compensate for or buffer against evaluation retaliation. And obviously, these aren't the ideal ways to go, and some of them may not even be ethical. So what I want to suggest, and I'll get into a little bit of the research, is that there is another way where you can have them work as hard as you think appropriate for the learning outcomes that you've spelled out, and you can give them the grades that they deserve with no evaluation retaliation. Before I get to that, we're talking about workload and grades. Let me give you some other numbers around WSU that you may or may not be aware of. Anybody know what the average GPA is at WSU? It's 3.2. Nearly a B+. That's grade inflation for you. Of course, it's not just WSU, it's everywhere. There's another study that showed that grade inflation has advanced at about 0.14 per decade. So it's still with us. How many hours a week do you think students spend on their courses?
2 to 3.
10. The whole week, probably 10.
10? Okay, for one course or for all their courses?
Probably all the courses.
I was saying
Yeah.
one course. Yeah.
Okay. It might be different at the other campuses. You got a different student profile there. Tri-Cities, what do you think? We can't hear you. Do you have it muted? I'm sorry, what was that number again?
What, per class?
Yeah, how many hours a week do you think the students spend per course at Tri-Cities?
5.
5, I hear? Okay. Vancouver?
Depends on the class, but I would say for some of my more rigorous classes, they probably spend 6 hours just on mine, but other ones, a couple. That's it.
Okay. Now, there's actually a standard that you've all heard, and I think it might come from NWCCU, correct me if I'm wrong on that, Rebecca, that says, but I know it's in some accreditation body, that says that students should spend per, say, 3-credit-hour course, 10 hours per week combined studying and attending class. So the rule of thumb is spend about 2 to 3 hours outside of class for every hour inside of class. The interesting thing about that standard when I last looked at it is it doesn't say, yeah, but for what grade?
Mm-hmm.
Which it kind of begs that question, right? Well, a few years back at Vancouver in the business program there, I'd known for a long time, we'd been telling students you need to spend 10 hours, per class per week. Yeah, but professors tend to blow hard. At least that's what the students think, right? And it's like, is that really true? So we actually went and did a survey of students, and we had them self-report the number of hours that they spent on various courses. And we had them self-identify, and then we went back at the end of the semester and retrieved their actual grades. And what we found was the business students at Vancouver, those who were getting A's were spending 9 hours per week studying plus attending class, and those who were getting B's were spending 6 hours. Now, it's also in the NESI data, and I took a look at that, the most recent NESI data we had, and for 15 credit, this is WSU, for 15 credit hours going to class and studying, it's about 25 hours a week. An average class load's what, 4 or 5 classes? Yeah, I remember when I first saw this NESI data years ago, there was a meeting of the teaching academy. At the time, there was a corresponding student academy, and student government leaders were there. And we were going through the first time, at least I ever looked at the NESI data. And at the time, it reported 11 hours outside, for Plemons students, 11 hours outside of class for all their classes combined for the whole work week. And the faculty, we all kind of look at each other and we're like, oh, that's not true. There's no way they're spending 11 hours per class. And then the vice provost corrects us, no, that's total. And we're like, nah, that's too low. And all the students nodded their heads, yeah, that sounds right to us.
So, and what is it now, Tom?
It's actually about the same. So if you figure the 15 hours, assuming that they're going to class, or 12 to 15 hours, and then you add 11 hours on top of that, you get to about 25 hours per week. And remember, the WSU GPA is 3.2, so they're spending an average of 25 hours a week if they're taking a full load, and they're getting B pluses, BB pluses. So that's the standard. Now, hopefully, we can demand more than that of our students. But the trick is, if we're going to demand more than that, particularly if we end up being kind of above average for the workload compared to our peers here, then it's natural to say, yeah, but then they're going to hate that, and I'm going to get rated down on my evaluations. So let's deal with that a little bit. I'm sure there's nothing else I forgot. Okay, so up there, can I have that clicker?
Stretch.
Thank you.
Yep.
So up there, you'll see a title of something called the fair process effect, and I'm going to fill out this 2x2 table in a minute. But let me sort of tell you about this concept and where it comes from. So as Rebecca mentioned, I'm a professor of management, so I do research in the management area. And perhaps one of the most robust effects in all of management research, that includes research on leadership, is this thing called the fair process effect. It's been found in dozens of studies. So this is not something that's going to suffer the replication crisis. And it's really kind of interesting. And well, let me sort of lay out the pattern here, sort of get you guys think first in terms of the workplace, and then we can talk about the classroom context. So, what we want to predict here, what we're going to fill out in these 4 cells, is when are people at work most likely to complain about a decision? Okay, or even protest the decision, not commit to the decision, refuse to cooperate in worst case scenario. Okay, as a function of whether they think the outcome and or process is fair. So outcome fairness means, did I get the outcome I deserved? Did I get the pay raise that I deserved? Did the right person get the promotion, etc.? Process fairness refers to the quality of the decision-making procedures that led to that decision. So how was the promotion decided? Who decided it? What information did they look at? How do they keep their biases out of it? These kinds of things. And to simplify, to kind of lay out this pattern, we'll look at the extremes if things are either fair or unfair, but of course there are shades of gray in between. So let's start with the easiest predictions here. When is there most likely to be no complaints? Which of those 4 combinations up there?
Fair and fair.
Fair and fair.
But not working.
Not working. I don't know if it's a distance. Could you advance one? Thank you. That is correct. No complaining behavior. Okay? And probably almost as easy to guess, when is there most likely to be complaining behavior?
Unfair and unfair.
Okay? That's one. And sure enough, there it is. Now, the other 2 off-diagonal cells are a little bit harder to predict. So let's take the one on the top right first. So this means the outcome, you think the outcome is fair. You thought you got what you deserved and probably also got what you wanted. But you understand a few things about the way the decision was made were kind of weird and kind of suspect. Do you, in this instance, complain about it?
Yes.
You would? Yes, no, not so sure. What do you think most people would do?
Complain? Not complain. If you get what you want, you probably won't complain.
Why not?
Because you have what you wanted. The outcome is achieved.
So the outcome is achieved, and why risk it by having them go through the process again?
Potentially.
That's apparently how most people think. One more. There's almost no complaining behavior. Not no complaining. There's always somebody. You, apparently.
No, I said I wouldn't.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got that wrong. Okay. But you're pretty much close to 0 complaining behavior. Okay, we got one more cell to go here. And now we have the opposite. So here, you think the outcome is unfair. You did not get what you deserved. You probably didn't get what you want. But you're pretty sure that the decision-making procedures that led to that decision were fair and right, and you can't find anything wrong with them. Do you complain? What's that?
Depends.
Depends?
No, I don't think I would.
Why?
And
if you think it's fair, then
Yeah, exactly.
this why.
Did you say good?
There's this why if it's the process were fair. So.
Okay, so what's your case?
Yeah.
Can't think of one. You agree the process was fair? Yeah, the process was fair. Then what's your problem? You didn't get what you want? And thank you. And so you get almost no complaining behavior.
What is it that creates all the complaining? Just the too unfair?
There's actually
There's a lot of complaining.
correct. It's just the too unfair. So that's interesting. So where does the name come from? Fair process effect. As long as the process is fair, so that left column, you get no complaining behavior. Outcomes are relevant.
So is the fair would be dependent upon the individual then, and not on like what's actually fair then, because if the process were completely unfair throughout, but the product or like the result was good, that doesn't necessarily mean that like the process was fair.
Correct.
Okay.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that you love the decision.
Yeah.
But this is just here's you tolerate it.
Gotcha.
And this effect, I think, is more robust in the short run. I mean, if you keep getting unfair outcomes over time, but you think the process has been fair, after a while you're going to question whether the process is really fair. But in the short run, this is entirely very robust, and we keep finding it in management context after management context. Employees may not like it, but they'll tolerate unfair outcomes as long as they believe the process is fair. Right? And as I like to say to business students, and this is good news for people who have to deliver bad news. Right? Which is managers who have to say, I'm sorry you didn't get the promotion. I'm sorry it's not the raise you want. I'm sorry it's not whatever. Or, in our case, faculty said, I'm sorry it's not the grade you were hoping for. So you can't always have everybody protesting every time you have to say no. And so this is one of kind of my favorite things to teach. Back to your point, what's a fair outcome that's kind of subjective? Oh, yes, it is. And there's been decades of psychology research on parsing the various ways in which people are really subjective and biased about it. Similarly, there's been decades of research on what people tend to consider as fair process. The good news is that while outcome fairness can be, in many contexts, if not most contexts, hopelessly subjective, and you end up in a situation, at least with employees, where not everyone's going to agree that the outcome was fair. Fortunately, people generally can agree that the process was fair, that we're looking for the same things. I'll get a little more in a minute about what we're looking for. But that's the notion behind the fair process effect. So as a management professor, I was very curious, does this only work in the workplace, or might this also work in the classroom? Which is what led to that study. And just to give you a little bit of idea about what people can agree upon when we're looking for fair process, just some generic principles, and then we'll get more specific in terms of classes and syllabi. Working. We can just skip over that. Thanks. Would you like to maybe switch places, or?
Sure.
Okay.
It's easier.
So, this is a researcher by the name of Gerald Leventhal, and he figured out there's sort of these 5, 6, or 7. These are sort of the major, I'm going to list 5 of these, features that people look for in fair decision processes. And the interesting thing about it is that this research started in legal settings in terms of people's reaction to legal authorities, judges, juries, cops, and so forth, whether they believe they've been, had a fair trial or been dealt with fairly by the legal system. And then a bunch of people said, I wonder if the same principles when people are dealing with organizational authorities like bosses and CEOs. And it turns out, yeah, it's the same 5. And they are consistency principle, that fair decisions should have a sense of consistency. The rules should be consistent, both across people, that nobody is above the law or beyond the rules, and also across time in the sense that precedent matters. You should have voice or input into decisions that affect you. If you're denied that voice, you tend to get fairly upset. Although other research on this is really interesting. It shows also that the voice has to be sincere, or it's worse than having no voice. If you give insincere voice, you're worse off than not asking their opinion at all. The information that feeds a decision should be accurate. And how do you know that's accurate? Well, documentation is really important in terms of the perception of accuracy. Also, if it's more subjective information, then the opinion should be coming from experts. So in the legal system, we call them expert witnesses. In organizations, we call them consultants. Bias suppression. The authorities making the decision should have no conflicts of interest. And in the organizational setting, that standard is probably a little too high to attain, is quite the same purity that you get in the legal setting. But, if you're a supervisor, you're expected to put aside any personal biases you might have to the best of your ability. You might not get rid of it completely, but you're expected to make an attempt to suppress them. And then finally, can a bad decision be corrected? So, in the legal system, we have appeals, and large organizations we also have appeal procedures. Small organizations, it might just be a manager who's got a reputation for having an open mind and willing to admit when he or she is wrong. So these are kind of the 5 features that we look for, and we also look for these features in terms of how classes are designed. And as I'll get to in a minute, we see some of these same features being really important, and some of these you can put in your syllabus. All right. Now, so as I mentioned, I wanted to go ahead and study whether this actually applies to the classroom. So basically, what we did is we tested the following model, if you will, that the grades that students are getting or expect to receive leads to some sense of outcome fairness. And sure enough, and this is kind of obvious, and other research has shown this too, but is that students do think of grades in terms of fairness. Did they get the grade they deserve? It's not just getting the grade that they want, that they need for whatever reason. There's a sense of deservingness. And then does that lead to student evaluations of teaching, or it's abbreviated SET in the literature? And then is that then somehow qualified or moderated by whether the process is fair or not? And the punchline is, yeah, this model was supported. So what we did is we asked students, we did a retrospective study where we asked students to pick a course from the previous semester, and we had them pick either the one with the highest grade or the lowest grade. We flipped a coin for that. It was randomly determined. And then we asked them a set of common student evaluation of teaching questions, and some of these are actually taken from the business school one. And then we also asked them some questions about whether they thought the outcome was fair, and there's already a published established scale for this, so we used that. And ask questions like this: my grade I received in the course compared to the grades other students got, the grade I feel I deserved, etc. And that scale had good reliability. We also, from the same authors, pulled out their measures of process fairness. So missed work makeup policies, students tend to think of in terms of fair process. Course attendance policies. Again, these are the kinds of things we can talk about in the syllabi. Instructors' expectations. And then the Leventhal's 5 factors, which I just described to you, then we added to their scale some of these things we thought were similar to those 5 factors, and then it all held together and was reliable. So did the instructor follow his or her own syllabus? That would be an application of the consistency rule, for example. The way we could or could not appeal grades, that would be the correctability rule. And this is what we found. So on the y-axis is student evaluations of teaching, and we took a look both in terms of outcome fairness and also in terms of grades. It's the same pattern. And basically what you find is that when fair process is high, you've got a flat line, meaning that their sense of outcome fairness, and I don't have yours, their sense of grades doesn't matter, has absolutely no effect on student evaluations of teaching, as long as they perceive the process to be fair. By the way, let me back up for a second. It's something that's implied in what I've said so far, is that this fair process effect only works if the processes are transparent. I've met managers and some faculty say, well, I know how I'm graded. I don't have to tell students. I know I was fair. It's not enough to be fair. You got to look fair, right, if you want to benefit from this. And students benefit from this because students want fair process too. It's not just about keeping your evaluations down for your own needs. This matches the pattern that was found in the management literature, same pattern. So we replicated the effect that's very robust in the management literature in the classroom context. So fair process matters. Now, one of the other things we asked before we sort of gave them all these scales I just showed you and some others is we just had them answer. The first thing we asked them after we had them pick and think about a certain class that they had the previous semester is just write in your own words, what do you think made the class fair or unfair? We didn't define fairness or anything. We just wanted their own words and see what kind of things they would come up with. And here are the top 10 things they came up with. Well, sure enough, it's about grading fairly. That's what they tend to care about the most. Whether instructors treated everybody equally or were biased towards some students. So this is the consistency rule across people. So it fits with Leventhal. It's so much an issue of, I don't think of this as an issue of fairness, but obviously they did. The instructor was helpful with learning. The rigor level was appropriate. Instructor provided study guides. Here's another consistency item. Exam items did not match the material covered. The instructor used rubrics that matched the criteria and expectations laid out in the syllabus. And the instructor followed a syllabus that was clear. Is there anything else on there? And took feedback from the students. So this incorporates the voice principle as well. So, let's see what we're doing on time. I'm almost done here. So, there's one more, makeup work and absences. So, borrowing what we learned and also looking at some other studies in this literature, what would make for a procedurally fair course? What seem to be the most important things that students would perceive a course as procedurally fair? So one has a lot to do with things that are in the syllabus. So you got to make clear what's graded and how, in some level of detail. A big one is if you're going to grade participation, how exactly do you do that? Is it contribution? Is it participation? Is it attendance? And if you're going to do it, it should be stated in the syllabus and what percentage it is. In my syllabi, I also go and I actually talk about exactly how I grade it, what I'm looking for, and that I grade it immediately after every class meeting. Provide rubrics. So if you're using grading rubrics, which if you aren't, you should provide those in the syllabi. Any course policy you have should be in there. So what are you going to do with late submissions? So I'm curious about what your policy is on that. What about appeal procedures? What if they disagree with the grade that you give them? What are they supposed to do next? How quickly did they have to do it? Electronic devices is becoming a big one. There's a lot of variance amongst faculty about their views on electronic devices, so it's not obvious to students. Academic integrity, of course, that's one other thing I'll say, not so much I've learned from the study, but just in my role as associate dean and previously a program director at Vancouver. And I've read a lot of syllabi and I've read a lot of evaluations, more than God intended anybody to read. I've seen a lot of academic integrity since I see the university boilerplate statement, but then there's no statement that follows that says, in my class, I consider an academic integrity violation to be, right? Because we think, one thing in discussions I've noticed with faculty when we talk about academic integrity is a lot of faculty think most faculty have the same views as they do. A really big one in which faculty don't have very similar views is on collaboration among students. So particularly if you have group projects. So what are they supposed to collaborate on and what's supposed to be individual work? I mean, most faculty could probably agree on an articulation of the spirit of a policy behind that, but the manifestation of that, it's all over the board. And so I've seen a lot of cases go where that student committed an academic integrity violation, and I read the syllabus like, that's not obvious to me. And it's, part of the reason it's not obvious is because they didn't just read your syllabus, they read a bunch of other people's syllabi and saw other policies in other courses, and they're kind of anchoring off of that. So I strongly encourage you to not just include, because you have to, the university boilerplate statement, but then add on right after that. And in my class, I say, here are 4 behaviors that may not seem like integrity violations, but they are. Bam, 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 bam. And
intentional versus unintentional plagiarism, for example.
Right.
We have it because we work with international students, so we have a consistent plagiarism or academic integrity policy. And we teach students how to paraphrase and how to cite, and they're not familiar with those practices. And they come from countries where they have to copy verbatim whatever is said in the textbook, and here is different. So we have a very, very clear academic integrity policy, differentiating between the first incident and the second incident and what happens. So yeah.
I think that's a really great point, right? Because you're trying to think of, well, who's actually reading your syllabus and going to use it? And it's not just students coming from other courses at WSU, but from other courses from other institutions in other nations that have very different notions of that.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think I just got a couple more items here. Just a couple things to keep in mind. Stick to your syllabus policies, whatever they are. It's a consistency principle. And one other thing that came up that I think is really helpful is grading blindly by student ID number, and let them know that you're grading blindly, particularly in small classes, because students might get it after a while. They might say, well, there's the teacher's pet, or this teacher just doesn't like this student for whatever reason, and they might worry about it. But if they know that you're grading blindly, then they know that that can't enter into it, and that fits with the general principle of bias suppression. I think that's all I've got. Oh, and then of course be transparent, because that's what counts. So I don't need to see those. So do you want to just take questions at the end and just turn it over to you? Because I think you'll probably be able to answer some of these questions.
Yeah, do you guys want to keep rolling and then we'll leave time for workshop? Okay, that's great. I guess I'll switch your spots.
Okay.
I'm just kind of curious for all 3 sites, would folks mind going around saying what department or unit that they're from, just to get a sense of who's here? Do you mind? start here and go around, and then we'll hit the other campuses. Please.
So I'm Rashida from International Programs.
Yeah. Iman, International Programs.
I'm Samuel Aino, Educational Psychology Program.
Natalia, College of Education, Teaching and Learning.
Raven Weaver, Human Development.
Samantha Kazarian, Neuroscience.
Mary Packer, AOI.
Mimi, UA, that's academic outreach and integrity. Integrity, no.
Innovation.
Innovation. You can tell my values. They're just
Lindsay Barkley, AOI.
Okay, and so I'm Anna, and I hail from the English department. How about Vancouver?
Amina.
I'm sorry.
Amina. Sorry, Amina.
Amina, AOI.
Okay, very good.
I'm Kimber Seville from the Psych department here in Vancouver.
Okay, great, thank you. And Tri-Cities.
I'm Alice Matthews in the Psychology Department. Mansberger, Anthropology.
Kevin from Mathematics.
Rochelle from College of Education, Teaching and Learning.
Okay, great, thanks. And then also, I was curious, by show of hands, who works with students who are either first or second year students or pre-WCU? Who's working with first or second years? Okay. Thank you. I was just kind of curious for some context. Okay, let's see what happens here. Keep going. All right. So I think this is a really interesting and really helpful conversation. And so the angle that I wanted to sort of add to that, or my inroads for this conversation, is thinking about students' perceptions of faculty. And so as the director of CLASP, there's really three things we're always trying to do. We're trying to help students feel more invited into the interior life of the university, so helping students understand kind of their place here, working with faculty to help them really think critically about the relationship between retention and pedagogy, like do they have a role in those matters, and then really including folks on the student affairs sides of the house, because there's a lot of great folks doing a lot of great work, but they often complain rightly that they don't have any access to faculty or any way to collaborate. So that's the kind of the three things that we're always up to. And so I just want to say, I think there's always two dangers in talking about students who are underrepresented, right? And so we either sometimes will stereotype or hyper-define students, and that's not necessarily productive. But then I think sometimes there's really good intentions that err the other direction, right? So we end up having not any conversation at all because we're not quite sure how to talk about things, and we end up really sanitizing difference. And so I just kind of acknowledge that. So hopefully as we move forward in conversation, we can know that those are kind of the two banks of the river, but find our way. Okay, so here, this slide does not look terribly exciting, but this is really what I'm hoping folks can take away from this aspect of the workshop. So I think there's three things that CLASP we're always working on when we're working with faculty. And the first one really ties in quite closely, this idea of making the rules explicit whenever possible for students. Absolutely, that's a matter of equity, and these things don't cost us really anything. And so at some point it's a matter of, it's just training our brains to figure out what that looks like, because I trust that the intention of most faculty is good, but we know what we know. We're so familiar with what we know that it's oftentimes hard for us to sort out what explicitity would look like. And so the second thing we're always talking with faculty about is this idea of how to diffuse the effects of stereotype threat with environmental cues. And so what can faculty do to reduce stereotype threat? And we'll unpack that term in a minute. And then also just, again, encouraging a malleable view of intelligence. And so to what extent can we constantly be helping students understand that we don't see them as fixed in any way, and that they should likewise not see themselves in those terms. Okay, so who's familiar with, by show of hands, who's familiar with stereotype threat already? I know we have psych folks, okay. Okay, so just really quickly, I really enjoy this book, Whistling Vivaldi, if this is of interest to you, because how we define it here in the next 20 seconds will be insufficient. But stereotype threat theory is this idea that oftentimes we're in situations where there's a threat of being viewed in a stereotypical way, and a fear that we'll do something that will confirm a stereotype about a group that we're associated with, right? And then that actually is linked with lots of good data to diminish performance. And I can't stop talking about this because I think it's so incredibly important, and particularly because the students who are most affected by stereotype are the students who care the most and who are working the hardest, right? That's terrifying to me as a faculty member, right? That I'm going to have students in my class that absolutely are prepared to be there, are motivated to be there, but that there might be things happening in that classroom environment that put them in a situation where they perform below the level that they are prepared and motivated to perform at. So if you're not familiar, Dr. Claude Steele, in the early tests, they gave black and white students from Stanford, all really smart students, a challenging portion of the GRE, and there was this huge discrepancy with how white and black students performed. And on the second, you can see the second set of bars, and this again is it's kind of a gross generalization, so you'll go back and read the research for yourself. But the only thing that they changed is they let the students know that there wasn't anything in the task, that no way to identify them in the task. And you can see that those are really different. Wow, that's how I feel. I can't stop talking about this because I just think, oh my gosh, what if that's my classroom, right? And that the only difference is some students were feeling this pressure that either by things that I've said or just things that happened to them earlier in the day, right? Or just things that have happened to them earlier in the week or things that happened to them before they got to WSU. And so for me, this is something we can always be paying attention to. And just in summary, so a reduction in stereotype threat, what we're always working towards, when we're working against stereotype threat, isn't what I think this is really helpful language from Steele, an open, relaxed posture for learning. And I think that's interesting because at least in English land, from where I hail, there was a lot of publication. There's a good 5 or 10 years where everything was talking about the contact zone of the classroom and having classrooms where we're debating ideas, and that is good and right. But that I think can be teased apart from this idea that a student is psychologically distressed by wondering kind of what's happening in the environment. And so this isn't to say that we can't facilitate challenging conversations in class, but to the extent that we can figure out ways to help students stay in an open, relaxed posture for learning, they will then perform in the ways that they, according to their ability and their level of preparation, which to me is an issue of equity, right? So I'm going to show you in a second. So CLASP had done some work with the folks who teach Psych 105 here on the Pullman campus, and one of the Psych 105 instructors decided to retool her syllabus in light of those conversations. And I thought it was interesting. So when we said hey, we want you to think about being more explicit, we want you to think about reducing stereotype threat, and we want you to think about how you can encourage a malleable view of intelligence just in your syllabus. And these are the things that she decided to do. And so I don't find this list prescriptive by any means, but I think it's interesting, right? So when we proposed those 3 tasks, this is what she came up with. She decided that she wanted a syllabus that had better visual appeal and that was learner-centered in these following ways: that the grading criteria was clear, which goes back again to the research we looked at earlier, that there was an easy-to-read schedule, again, an issue of being explicit. She decided to host virtual office hours before exams, and so instead of requiring students to come back to campus, perhaps their parents or they're working on the other things going on, that you could do that with the digital tools that are available to us. She ended up with a section that showed expectations for students and what they could expect of her, and so she made those things clear as well, or changed how that was organized. She also was a first-generation student, and she was remembering back, as we're going through this workshop, she's like, oh, that's right. When I was a first-year student, I honestly didn't know. When it said office hours, I thought that meant I'm going to be in my office doing my important work, don't come by, right? And so she's like, oh, I'm going to add language that explains what office hours are there for, to be a little bit, put out a better invitation. And then she decided also to include information about community resources. Again, I don't think these things are prescriptive, but that's how she interpreted the task. So you can see, not very closely, I apologize, I was going to bring them so you could look at them, but I forgot. But so on the left, you see the old syllabi, which is pretty much boilerplate coming from the department. And on the right, you can see the beginning of the one that she revised. And again, I love looking at the things that she did, but I wouldn't ever, I don't think I would build a syllabus that looks like that. And so I don't want you to get excited and think okay, I have to build mine that way. I think the point is that you now have an instructor who's critically engaged with her own practice, right? And so it was interesting enough that we said, let's go show these 2 syllabi to 300 students who have been coded by WSU as underrepresented in one way or another, right? And they're not in her class. We're just going to go give 300 students who don't know her these 2 syllabi and ask them some questions about it. So really they're questions about faculty perception because they don't know this, they haven't been to this class, they don't know this particular instructor. And so I pulled a couple because I thought they were interesting. So the 300 students who we asked to look at these documents thought, and so on the left you're going to have the old, and then on the right you're going to have the revised. They said that this document helps me understand expectations, and there was quite a jump between the old and the new. We asked, and so they said this document clearly describes what students can expect. There was a huge jump, and really I don't know that she added that much more language, but she actually built it as kind of a T-bar. Like these are my expectations of you. Here are my expectations, or this is what you can expect from me. And so that information was easy to find, and you can see there's a pretty significant change in perception there. This document guides me to the information I would need to be successful. The information was findable. There was a table of contents in the new design. If you go back and see, you can't totally tell, but she actually had, you could see on page 2, you'll find this. On page 3, that's where you'll find that. Okay, and then I think this is fascinating. So remember, the students who are taking this survey have never met this person, but they overwhelmingly found her much more approachable, right? So then the danger there is I don't know if I want to write a syllabus that makes me feel approachable because I'm pretty busy already, right? And so I don't know that I necessarily want students liking me or coming by, but we'll get to that. So maybe that's just me. Is that just me? Am I the only one that doesn't want every student to come by?
Alone.
You're not alone. Let's be real. It's week 9, right? This is week 9. Okay, question 8. This document conveys the instructor's commitments to uphold principles of diversity and inclusion. I find this fascinating. What on earth? How is it that you have such a big jump that you perceive this person to be much more aware of issues of diversity and inclusion just based on the syllabus? That's curious to me, right? And it was curious enough that we actually this semester have an open study looking more specifically, trying to tease out more about this, and so stay tuned. But I thought I made a slide so I wouldn't forget to say, I thought it was also really important to note for those of us who were worried about seeming nicer or more open, that she also reported that she had a steep reduction in student email queries. Right? So when we make these moves to appear more open and inclusive, or design documents in such a way that they are maybe more learner-centered, it's not going to actually create more work for us. In fact, it might even create less, right? Students find the information they need, they don't have to email you about it, and then kind of tying that all back to stereotype threat, to the extent that a student perceives that this faculty member is, understands issues of diversity and inclusion, I think it's fair to say, although I don't have the data yet, to say there's a better chance that they will come to that class with already in a more open, relaxed posture for learning, right? That environment hopefully will have less kind of initial stereotype threat, because the perception is that this is going to be a space where I'm going to be treated fairly, I'm going to be graded fairly, and so on and so forth. Okay, so it's very hot. It's very late in the day. This is the democratic part of the show. Would you like to do large group, do you have questions you want to discuss and have a large group kind of Q&A session? Or I would propose next we would just take 2 or 3 minutes in smaller groups and figure out what's useful to you here. Kind of, what do you prefer? What do you prefer in Tri-Cities?
Small groups, probably.
Yeah, the question was, do you want to take 2 minutes and kind of figure out what you know, or do you have some questions you want to go straight to question and answers?
Okay, so we're fine on discussion.
Okay, good. Yeah? All right. So your homework is take 2 minutes, talk to somebody next to you. What from this kind of joint presentation, what's immediately useful to you? What are the takeaways? And then we're going to ask you to do something with it. So be warned. Pick ones that you actually want to work with. Okay, 2 minutes. Ready to go. So I have found, this is funny, right? Just because and when you sit in a room of teachers, sometimes they're not awesome participators, but it's like Pavlov's dog. If you bring a pen and say, I'm going to write what you tell me on the board, all of a sudden everybody will play. Do you know this? This is true, right? So I have my pen and I'm ready to hear back from folks. So what was the substance of your conversation? What are the takeaways? What are the potential usable bits and pieces that you you're not committed, that you might decide to go home and tinker with in your own syllabus? So maybe let's, Tri-Cities, can we hear from you first, maybe?
Sure. So we agreed upon a table of contents being useful in our really long syllabi.
All right.
Maybe defining office hours too. I thought that was kind of cool. I never thought of that before.
Okay.
I'm excited to try grading blindly, just to see how that changes things.
Sorry, I missed that one.
Oh, blind grading.
Oh, blind grading.
I like that one too.
I have a question by a show of hands. Who can do that? I definitely teach a course where it's not even an option. Who can blind grade if they want to? Okay, good. So yes, good. It's a mixed group.
We do sometimes. Yeah, we do.
You can. Okay. Any others from Tri-Cities? Okay.
The malleable view of intelligence and growth mindset stuff.
Growth mindset. Okay. I know this is a serious workshop, but can I just really fast tell you guys a funny growth mindset story? I don't know, I think it's funny.
Sure.
So the public school in Pullman was hitting it hard last fall. Like it was growth mindset all day, every day. And my son was playing Parks and Rec football. He went for the first day. I dropped him off. I go to pick him up. And apparently some other child there, when the coach said, hey, try that again, they had said, no, F you, which not cool. I'm not laughing about that. But my son Mo, I was like, hey Mo, how was the first day? He's like, man, there's a kid on my team and he does not have a growth mindset. That's awesome. I'm gonna write your good work, teacher. Like this happened after school. The kid was thinking, oh, he doesn't have a very flexible brain. Yes, I love that. So okay, so growth mindset. All right, thanks. Pullman, do you guys want to add anything? Oh, did I miss one? Vancouver? I think it's gone.
I think, yeah, Vancouver's.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So what we have on our syllabi expectations from the students. We expect you to be on time, do this, do that, but we don't have what they expect from us. So I really like that.
Yep.
And yeah.
That's faculty. That's right. Did I mention that right? Yeah.
Yep.
Great.
I think the basic thing was not to assume that students understand what you mean by concept or by what you've put in. They come to the class with expectations they've carried from another class to yours, so you need to clarify whatever it means.
Absolutely. I thought that bit about I was implicated in the cut and paste on the academic integrity, right? There's things in the syllabi that we know, for good reason, the chair of your department says, this stuff better be in, and so it's like, oh, and so in my mind that means that stuff's not open for for expansion, but right? I mean, of course I'm going to cut and paste what I'm supposed to cut and paste, but then I'd never even considered this idea that I could then go, what that means on my planet, you know, what that looks like when you're looking for a grade in this class. I thought super helpful. Yes. Anybody else? Yes.
Well, I'm not an instructor. I'm an instructional designer. But just thinking about like how my instructors might be affected by like the idea of getting bad student evaluations. That when I look at their syllabi and I see like they're kind of avoiding like making it too rigorous, I can kind of point out to them, like, if we clarify certain expectations, you can make it as rigorous as you'd like. So I kind of thought clarifying was good as well, which is something I got confirmed. So
right, because you're doing this coaching and they're pushing back sometimes on things. And it's going to be okay. I've seen a chart. It's
it's all going to be okay.
You'll survive this. Absolutely.
We didn't talk about this, but one of the things that sort of stands out to me is like, in my mind, I assume the students want the shorter syllabus, like that they're just the information, they don't want to dig in through it, but it makes sense that maybe a longer syllabus that's more visually appealing, that's got a table of contents. Like I would never take room out of my syllabus and add a table of contents, make my syllabus longer would be helpful. I'm always trying to squeeze it down into 3 to 4 pages so it's not a novel. So I feel like that's intimidating, but I think there's room for a happy medium where it can be more visually appealing and more organized. And I was telling my seniors, because we do posters in my senior capstone class, and I always tell my students that buzzing feeling in your head is your brain working too hard trying to find the information. But I never thought about applying that to a syllabus.
Yes, that is too dense.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, just to add to that, that's just something we do a lot in our department too. We'll come across a lot of stuff if we're trying to recreate a course for our internal purposes. We'll say, wow, this is really text heavy, and we'll start breaking up the information, giving it tables or bullet points, so it's easier to read, less overwhelming. So I agree. I think that would be that's a good idea.
I'm glad you're feeling that permission, and it's making me think. We always think we're going to make it shorter because the students don't want to carry it around, but also I have definitely thought unkind thoughts about the person at the copy machine who has the really long, right? So there's at a department culture level, you're I hate that guy who puts out the really long syllabus and now I have to come back tomorrow. And so I think there are probably ways to think about publishing these things digitally, right? So we don't necessarily have to imagine that more is more expensive or bigger or heavier, right? We can kind of mess with how to do that so that we're not that person at the copy machine. Yes.
Jen, that's the thing that really kind of struck me the most is building off that point is, one, college of business needs a new syllabus template, as does a university. But it was just, it was so graphically well laid out. I think faculty, at least speaking for myself, are so steeped in sort of that culture of writing papers and how you do layout based on that, and not really thinking about the new layout options that are available, like the Psych 105 one that you showed, where it's so much cleaner and so much more inviting to read. I'm really kicking myself because my wife is a graphic artist and I should know better.
Please.
Well, somewhat related to that, I brought up the issue that I use rubrics, but sometimes I want, I'm teaching a 400 level, and instead of a traditional research paper, I wanted them to do a resource, a community resource. And I recently was asked during office hours, are you trying to trick us? Are you going to do this creative assignment where we're allowed to have some flexibility? And so that tension between how to make a rubric so that they can use and be flexible and have creativity in their assignments, but not getting so prescribed. And I think that we are kind of trained that way too. We need to have this information, but how to encourage thinking outside the box or still being able to have a rubric for that type of information. So I don't know if that's more of a conversation, but we were talking about that issue.
We'll put that on the list for AOI, right? Because I totally resonate. I more and more teach classes where one of my implicit goals is that which actually maybe it's explicit, that students just take big risks. I want them to take big risks and do interesting stuff, and I don't really want to show them examples because then they're going to do what right.
Exactly.
And so I completely resonate with that tension, and so I've been trying to get better at creating rubrics that show you where the points are coming from, but not telling you what to do. Right, and so finding what's a rubric look like that says take a giant risk, you won't be punished as long as
it's still content filled, but
pieces,
exactly. Well, I would come to that. So
so we work with the international students, and they come do not really understand what the syllabus is. So we do spend time teaching the syllabus. So we have activities, syllabus analysis, but still, I didn't know that I was allowed to have my own design, and she's the associate director of in our program. So I asked her, and she said yes. So I'm also thinking about teaching the syllabus to the students, not only teaching it, spending more time.
That's a great idea.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Tying it down to
Syllabus.
a theme.
I've definitely heard of faculty. So particularly if you create something like the revision one for Psych 105, and it is you expect that it's used as a reference tool. If you design it as a reference tool for students, and you expect them to use it so they don't email you and ask you super stupid stuff, right?
Yeah.
Then it would make sense to have an open book quiz. Right? You match and it would take 5 minutes in class, but you're like, hey, here's your open book quiz. Use your book. You know, I've created this document for you. I expect you to reference it, become familiar.
I actually love this idea of the syllabus analysis for the like 100 and 200 level courses, because I feel like I'm former faculty who's teaching right now for my old department while I'm doing my other job, but I make my like 101 class like a college success / whatever I'm teaching. So I teach them how to sort of analyze their situation. We really go through the syllabus and look at like kind of what Sarah, but I never thought of it in the way that you're talking about it. But we do tons of analysis to teach them like success tips, how to write an email to a professor and get a response, things like that. One other thing I thought of is tone. I think the color of that second one, just adding some color to it, because if we think about who a lot of our students are, they're bombarded with color, and then we give them these black and white, big blocks of text to read in a syllabus, and I think that color just warmed it up. And I was thinking about that even with our tone. I have like a little motto that I use, and I put it in my syllabus usually by the office hours, and I also send it out often on emails or email responses. It's just simply, your success is my goal. So I came up with something like, what do I want my students? And I feel like we could start like with a motto or something that tells students, like, I'm not trying to trick you. I don't want to see you not do well. I want to see you get all the way through and be successful. That we could, when we make our syllabus layout effective and we make it warm, that invites them to feel like maybe we're approachable and we actually care about their success.
So I think it's a recurring thing. I've heard it, many people say it here, and it's the fact that there's a need to maybe take that research hub and find out what are the specific research principles, that's revised syllabus followed. Because it's not just about the color. There are some principles that, is it a table of content? Is it, I was trying to explain that for me in my multimedia learning design, and that's the unit I am in my educational psychology program. We talk about principles of design in multimedia. We talk about using Q as a principle. Q help people with low prior knowledge, So we know that Q is a principle for design learning. So irrespective of the color you choose, there is something called Q as a principle. There's something called verbal redundancy as a principle. When you are designing a PowerPoint, what you are saying should not be on the screen. What you're saying should be different from what is on the screen. That is a principle. So can we come up with principles to guide design of syllabus so that people can have that at the back of their mind when they're designing that kind of stuff?
Yeah, we're working on it. You want in? We're working on it, but you're more than welcome. Yeah, because I think the more the merrier, and that is the next kind of phase of research is looking at. And it's funny because Amy was so excited. That's who did not just Amy, who did the revision. She was so excited about it that she really wants templates. And my bias, I really just want critically engaged faculty, right? And so there's this tricky thing where it's like, well, do we just say, here's a template, which I think you're right. If we do research and say, this template works really well, these things make it easy to find, plug in your information and go. And based on the fact that this study was blinded, it seems like that there's probably something there, right? People will perceive you this way if you use this template. And so there's something important there. But for me, there's also this issue of that's part of it. But what I really want to know is, are you someone who's constantly thinking of ways to be more explicit? To think about how you, like this group over here was talking about, if when I bold things, my intention is, hey, I'm going to make sure you don't miss this information, but it reads like yelling. So then where are we at, right?
Well, it's definitely something that we implement over at Global Campus is consistency across the board, and we actually have templates that we implement on the online space, so that there's a consistency between the class schedule and whatnot, so everything looks similar, so students can easily find it and it's expected that this is the way it's going to look. If you need this information, it's going to be located here, and it's not as bombarded, I guess. So I think having some sort of template or design principle for syllabus is a great idea.
Yeah.
Although this analysis would take care of that, right? Because they learn how to analyze it and find.
Tri-Cities, you haven't had a turn in a while. You guys want to jump back in? Anything you want to riff off of? No? You're good? Okay. I think, anything else? I'm feeling pretty good about this list, right? Anything else we want to add to the list? While you're thinking, Amy, I do think that this is something that we can get better at that won't necessarily cost us money or time, right? The student won't necessarily be like coming and crying and telling us all their troubles. But if any of us who do teach first year courses or U4 courses can think about the fact that college success can be our business, and what small ways might we tinker to do that, I think that is really interesting. And again, this isn't empirical, but I started to notice as I've tried to get better at being explicit, because I think to me it's an equity issue, right? As I've tried to get better at this, I've noticed that I have more, quite often in the comments part of evaluations, students will say something about kindness. They'll say she's really kind, which to me is different than nice, right? So if when I say, hey, here's what's on the secret menu, right? Like here's what you didn't learn about it alive. Here's how you get around here. Here's how I'm just gonna be really clear with you about how you can take big risks and do okay in this class. That the way that perception was being translated to the student is like, man, this person is kind. But I think I don't know. I can't say that. It's not an empirical thing, but I've started to notice that. I was like, that's weird. That wasn't there a couple of years ago. Why kindness? I don't know. And then also when we work directly with students, we went to I think I saw 130 students on Pullman campus in the first week of class who were all first generation students or like low income. They were somehow coded as underrepresented, and we'd ask them, we're like, hey, the secret, like what still matters in college is getting to office hours. Like you need to meet your faculty, they need to know who you are. And so then what we would ask them, what are your reasons for not going? Like, why are you not gonna go see faculty? And like, just let's get it out. Like, tell me your real answers. And every single class, no matter who we were talking to, students will always say, I wouldn't go see them if I was like embarrassed because I should be doing. It's the exact opposite of the thing that you're thinking. You're like, well, if you're not doing well, you would come see me. And the students are like, hard no. Under no chance I'm coming to see you because I'm the first person in my family to go to college. This is a big deal. I came here with a good attitude. I came to work hard. I'm the smartest kid from my school, and I'm here, and I can't figure this thing out. And that means that I have disappointed my parents. I've disappointed you, and there's no chance I'm coming by because I don't deserve to come to your office. And faculty are like, no way. Yes way. Right? Yes way. Every time. And well, not every time. But and so trying to tell students like, no, that's not true. We do want to see you if you're struggling. But I think it's helpful for us at this side of the table to figure out ways in something like our syllabus that we can mediate that or like make better invitations. And like I said, I don't think it won't hurt us. We won't get more emails. It won't actually cost more time. But helping students understand that we do want to invite them into the interior life of the university. But okay, so we have like 10 minutes left. I just would open it up. We made a pretty good list. Any last minute adds? Something to add? Yeah. What about questions? Anything that you want to explore more deeply? You want to go back to a slide and expand the conversation? Want to make requests to the AOI staff for what you want to talk about next time?
Well, while you're thinking about it, I have a question that I hope is quick and isn't derailing. But coming from the Vancouver campus, I keep hearing about this thing that students call Syllabus Week.
It's a lie.
What exactly does that mean, in your opinion?
I think it means they don't think you're going to teach them anything that first week, so they kind of don't get prepared, which is not how I do things. So
Yeah, me either.
And one of my colleagues actually waits to go over the syllabus until the second week because she figures there's add drop. She might talk about it informally, say these are the expectations, and still have it available, but not go over it in the syllabus week.
Does she cover any required concepts in first week?
No, I don't think so.
That's the other impression, is that there's nothing that's important in the first week, so
Oh, no,
students
she
could add and drop during that
Yeah.
first week, and they
Okay.
won't miss anything.
Okay, so it's a label that doesn't have to do with too much time is spent going over the syllabus.
Mhm.
It's just a shorthand term that students are using here for nothing happens the first week. Don't go to
Or
class.
or like you're saying, shopping week.
Shopping week, yeah. That's a really good way to put it, shopping week.
Now, I know we don't have that at Vancouver. What about at Tri-Cities?
No.
So students might think it, but it's not.
Okay, thanks.
So I have a question about fairness because it's very important. So how can we ask the students about, like, sometimes we do midterm evaluations.
Mhm.
We ask them to give their about the course. So can
Mhm.
we insert this, whether they think their teacher is fair or no? Can I ask my students this question?
You could. I don't.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's.
And I think
It's an important point.
it is an important point, and I'm hesitating because I'm just wondering. I don't know the answer. If you might prime them in ways that you don't want to prime them by asking the question.
Because I want an honest answer. It's not like,
But another way to get it. I mean, when I've done the midterm evaluation, and we've all done these in versions on this, whatever version you may use, some sort of open-ended prompt. Like one I use is name 2 things that are going well and 2 things that are going poorly you'd like to see changed, right? And they write the open-ended responses. And I expect with some sort of open-ended prompt like that if they really think the class is unfair, they'll say so. Another thing that can be kind of helpful, this is a lot more work, but it's really useful, is setting up peer review systems where faculty go watch other faculty teach and then you interview their students for 20 minutes. So we have a system like that in business at Vancouver. We're all required to go through it. And I learn more from that about somebody's class than I do from reading their evals. And when students think something's unfair, it comes right up.
But this could cause tension among faculty.
It could, depending how it's handled. It doesn't cause tension among us, and in part because we're not competitive about it, and it's more really sort of a formative information than evaluative information. So faculty can put in the promotion packets or not, but we're more just trying to help each other teach better.
I wanted to add a comment on the sort of midterm evaluation piece. I mentioned when we were talking in the groups that I do a reflection activity around this time where I actually get the students to go back to here are the course expectations and how well do you think you're meeting those, and here are the learning goals for the class, where do you think you are, and gets them, again, with that transparency of linking these activities are related to what these outcomes that we're looking for, and then some of that growth mindset stuff of, what's gone well and what do you want to work on and what are some strategies to work on that. But that's a thought of the fairness piece could be built into that as well. A little bit about talking about the process a little bit more, I think.
What you're doing sounds great to me, and I think if you're asking that many questions and you throw in a fairness question, my guess is you're probably not overly priming them. But if it were like one of 2 or 3 questions you asked, that I'd be worried that priming. I'd be worried it was the old Shakespeare line that I've off to protest too much. Well, why are you asking?
Anyway, we developed that when we were doing the LIFT training as an option of sneaking in some of those things, and reflection is a nice thing for students to be doing. So just thought I'd share that.
Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you, Tom and Anna, from Rebecca and the AY team for joining us and presenting thought it was great. And thank you everyone for attending. Tri-Cities, good to see you. Thanks for hanging out. And until next time.